were the protocols of Zion an important factor in your awakening to the myth of Western civilization?
It was a significant part for sure. Actually, my first my study really began when I found a reference in a history book that I read that to me sounded very odd, and so I started investigating that. And as this is all part of a study of history, but also of a project.
David, I'm afraid we're going to have to come back in 3 minutes. That's the first commercial I warned you about. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back with David Livingston, historian who is recasting our understanding of Western civilization. Now, David, you told me before during an interview that you became suspicious when you were told that the Aryan races emerged from the Caucasus. Is this the point you were about to make before the commercial?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Right. It was a book that I was at a college that I was at in Montreal, and it was attempting to revive the old style of liberal arts education, and it used a text by William H. McNeill of the University of Chicago, and he referred to the sudden emergence of the Indo-Europeans out of the Caucasus, and it just seemed absurd to me. It just didn't make any sense at all. And so, yeah, that's precisely when I started to investigate. I started to dig a little further. And what happened is I got to a point where I discovered that it was an idea that originated out of the occult. And so I wanted to find out what was this occult influence about, and then the further I dug, the further I got. And eventually I got all the way back to the 6th century BC, and actually way beyond that, to try to get to the facts and get to the truth of what this influence was all about. And the thing is what it does in the end is it, even though you're looking at the past, it ends up transforming your perception of the present, which I think is essential.
Well, I want to just quote a statement you made recently on your blog. Basically, Western history is the history of the occult, without actual reference to the occult.
That's exactly
but
right.
Presented as the evolution of secularism and the progressive abandonment of superstition, right, meaning religion.
Right.
That is a wonderful summation of where we are, right, and nobody has put it so succinctly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you can ask a question.
Well, my question is, what is secularism then? It's
a disguise,
implying that it's the occult, it's Satanism.
Absolutely, that's right. And basically, this is how the way this whole myth is being invented. It's Hegel's version of history, and there's many things that went into its production. Largely, it was created by the Rockefeller and Carnegie Institute through the World War I period and after, when they basically created this myth of Western history. But it's actually evolved out of a Hegelian interpretation of history, and that Hegelian interpretation of history itself is evolved out of the Kabbalistic interpretation of history, specifically the interpretation of Isaac Luria. And Isaac Luria is considered the founder of what's called the New Kabbalah or the Modern Kabbalah, even though the Kabbalah evolved over 1,500 years before his time. He brought forward a new interpretation, and the crux of that interpretation was to see history as the progress of God coming to know Himself, and also the idea that the Messiah is coming, but you don't sit around and wait for Him to appear. You have to prepare the situation for His arrival. So you put those two together, and this is what it comes out to. So essentially, according to the Kabbalistic view, God needed to know Himself, so He created an other of Himself. And that other is man. And So the history of man is the evolution of the human being coming to know himself, but what he comes to realize in the end is that he is God.
Right. So, now, David, if I may interject here, I believe that statement's actually true, except the Kabbalists have distorted it. I believe that God does wish to know himself through his creation. Through his creation. But that requires that his creation transform himself into something that is godlike. That's the only way God can know himself, through creation.
Right.
Now, the Kabbalists think that they can usurp the role of God, and that they don't have to transform themselves or change at all.
That's right.
Am I right?
Well, that's pretty much it, exactly. It's
right. So it's just essentially when man claims to be God, he becomes Lucifer, a rebel against God, right, who wants to create his own reality.
Right. It's basically it's rejecting revelation and relying. This is what the idea of reason is. It's that we don't need God. We don't need revelation. We don't need the Bible or Quran. We don't need God to tell us what to do. We can figure it out ourselves. And that's what the meaning of reason is in the Age of Enlightenment. So this is what they spent the 18th century promoting, and the idea was to reject religion. And the great accomplishment of that period was the American Constitution, which is basically an attempt to provide our human-made revelation, a human-made plan, or what do you call it, like a blueprint, that society would govern itself by, as opposed to religion.
But what it all comes down to is that the rich and powerful are going to be God, and they're going to define reality according to their interests. Am I right?
Well, the Kabbalists, more specifically, the Kabbalists are using their wealth to fulfill their objectives, but their objectives are fundamentally based on this, pseudo-religious concept that they derive from their specific interpretation of the Bible, which is that the Messiah will come someday and that he will establish them as the rulers of the world.
Establish them. Now, who are we referring to as them?
Kabbalists.
The Kabbalists, right. Now, most of the Rothschild banking cartel, we can presume they were Kabbalists, can we not?
Absolutely. They're like the chief henchmen of, I don't know who's in charge, but they seem to be leading the push. I mean, they've been there since the accession of the Illuminati, so presumably they are the main operators of the scheme.
So essentially, we've got a world which has rationalized the Enlightenment and Western civilization, and modernists has portrayed it all as progress, but it's really just progress as progress toward getting closer to the devil and becoming more and more like the devil. So we live in an upside down world where
we're going backwards.
Where progress is actually regress.
That's right.
And catastrophe will probably be some kind of victory or celebration for these Kabbalists.
Yeah, it will be freedom of slavery, basically, right? The ultimate free state will actually be a fascist state, or a pseudo-free state. This is what we're being led to. Because basically fascism it's the goal, but it was articulated a long time ago, and it was articulated by Plato. Plato was the first visionary of the Kabbalah, is the way I would see it. And that's the importance of localizing the origin of Western civilization in Greece. Because the truth is that Greece was actually the first flourishing of Kabbalistic thought, and that's why we're being forced to consider that place as somehow the cradle of Western civilization, when there's really no truth to it whatsoever.
In spite of all this, how did Christianity actually have any impact at all? Because it certainly has had an enormous impact on Western civilization.
Absolutely. And that's why the progress was a slow and steady one that took many centuries. and only really started to gain steam in the last couple of 100 years. I mean, but really, the seizure of power, the slow seizure of power, really begins with the Crusades, and the Crusades really very much represent the appropriation of Kabbalistic ideas from Spain and from the Middle East, and this is how you get things like the Holy Grail, which are Kabbalistic legends, and so you get the burgeoning of this occult underground, and it slowly builds until you get other groups like the Rosicrucians, and then finally the Freemasons, and then finally the Illuminati, and this was the slow seizure of power. So Christianity was there, but these underground forces have been at work for a while.
Okay, where do the protocols of Zion fit in all this?
Well, they would be, the way I see them is that they approximate something of a blueprint for the plot. I see some inaccuracies in them, so I don't think that they're entirely accurate. I think they represent what's called the revelation of the method, which is a very dastardly kind of a scheme that you expose your plans to what would otherwise be your enemies, which is the average person, but then you use their disgust or their anger and direct it to your desired target. So, I mean, it's obvious that Hitler was brought to power by the same people, and I think that the 20th century can be summed up into the basic strategies of the 20th century can be summed up by what happened in World War I and World War II. First World War was to dismantle the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire, until that time, maintained control over Palestine. So they needed to remove it. World War II was then to use Hitler and Nazism and the claim of the persecution of the Jews to gain acceptance for this.
We'll be back in 3 minutes with David Livingston. Before the break, David was saying that he thought the Protocols of Zion were sort of a revelation of your strategy. What did you call it again, David?
Revelation of the method.
Revelation of the method. And you imply that it was designed to build up opposition, a kind of artificial opposition that will draw people to it, and then you can destroy it. Is that the idea?
Yeah, and basically what they did is they used it to request acceptance of the creation of the State of Israel.
Right. Of course, that's the whole Nazi period.
To use it to.
Yeah, I think though that I think you might be right, but I personally hold to the view that the document's genuine, which I think you agree, but that it wasn't revealed deliberately. And 2 weeks from now, we're going to have a guest who knew the lady who paid Joseph Shorst for the document. So I don't think they wanted to reveal that.
Okay, maybe not. But to return back to what you asked me originally, it was when for me the Protocols was originally the proof. I had doubts about. I had when I first started to be introduced to some of these conspiratorial perceptions or interpretations of history, I had my doubts. But when I read the Protocols, it was a confirmation, and it was. There was a specific, they mention in the Protocols that it's been centuries of work, and there was also reference that because I read a particular introduction that suggested that the conspiracy began sometime either around the time of Christ or around the time of Solomon, and it wasn't sure when it began. And I was really intrigued by this, and I decided that, for the importance of this book, what needed to be done is that somebody had to prove it historically. And so that's what I set out to do. I set out to write a book that would demonstrate the evolution of the conspiracy over the last 2,500 years. And that's pretty much what my first book is, The Dying God.